Good morning everybody, this is Kevin Mullins and thanks once again for tuning in to my YouTube channel. Yesterday, 6th of September 2018, was a big day in the Fujifilm world as they announced the Fujifilm X-T3, the long-awaited upgrade to the X-T2. I have this camera with me right now and I will be doing a full review on this channel very soon, so please do subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notifications and you'll be able to see that review and all of the content that I produce here too. As I said, I will work on a review, but for now I thought it might be useful to go through the entire menu system on the new camera. In many cases this will be very familiar to you, especially those that already shoot with the X-T2 or really any of the other Fujifilm cameras in fact. Wherever possible I'll point out any differences to the X-T2 or where any of the new features manifest themselves in the menus. You can see a running order in the notes below, so if you're just interested in the video settings for example, you can skip straight to that section. Whilst this isn't a review, I can tell you that I am totally blown away by the performance of the camera. I can say honestly that I didn't actually expect much from this update. But I was wrong, totally wrong. In my opinion, the X-T3 is a monumental upgrade over the X-T2, and in many ways a bigger upgrade than the X-T2 was compared to the X-T1. The camera looks almost the same, but as a wise man once said, I may not look like much on the outside, but I'm very clever on the inside. So let's get going into a deep dive of the menu system of the new Fujifilm X-T3. We'll start with the standard LCD display that you're probably all very familiar with. You can see in the top left there the Bluetooth icon, which indicates that the camera obviously supports Bluetooth now as well as wireless communication. When we press the disc back button, we'll see the standard information, exposure and settings. And on the image playback, we can also see the histogram and the red, green and blue channels. Incidentally, this image is 12,800 ISO. It's a Turner straight out of camera. And it's just a snapshot of my little boy, but the 12,800 images, ISO images, are very, very clean, and that's partly in thanks to the backlit sensor that they now have on the X-T3. In this case, the camera is showing me that it's detected a face, and the face detection, I'm pleased to say, is a lot better than it was in the X-T2, and I will be testing that further, obviously, for the review. We can also obviously see the shooting data for the image and the focus point, the histogram, all of that kind of stuff on the display on the back of the LCD and also in the viewfinder. We can also see things like the focal length and the lens used and the color space and all of that other good stuff, the shooting data there. Okay, image quality setting menu number 1. We have the image size, obviously that has not really changed. We have 3x2, 16:9. The numbers on the right hand side show you how many images that the camera will be able to record based on the capacity of the card that's in the camera at the time. Image quality, we have the usual fine, normal, fine plus raw, normal plus raw and raw. And raw recording again is compressed and lossless compressed. The lossless compression is absolutely no different to the uncompressed data. Now into the film simulation, we have Eterna, which is generally a cinematic film simulation. Came to the XH1 first, and it's much wanted on the X-T2, X-T3, so here we have it. We have all of the other stuff, obviously, Provia Standard, ProNeg High, etc., Acros, black and white, and sepia. All of those good things are in there. You have the green, red, yellow standard filters for the black and white, the monochromes, that you can flick through. Something that is very new is the black and white adjustment. In this menu option, you can warm up or cool down your black and whites. This is something I've been asking for decades, it seems, as somebody who shoots a lot of JPEGs and likes to warm those JPEGs up in post-production. You can see here now that you can actually do that in the camera. You have variants, I think it goes up to 9 and down to 9. The lowest level being very cool and the highest level being pretty much the same as the sepia setting. So that's a really cool new feature. We can just pop it up. I'm kind of liking so far around about +2 and +3 for my warm filters. And I think that's a really, really neat touch, and it gives us a little bit more control over those JPEGs that a lot of us have been asking for. We also have grain effect, which will add some digital noise to the images. We have weak and strong as per the X Pro 2 with the firmware update. You see we now also have the color chrome effect in the X-T3, very new. You have off, weak and strong. The development of the color chrome effect is derived from the reversal film Fortier, apparently, and the film was introduced in about 2004 with the catchphrase, higher contrast and more vivid color than Velvia. Now, if you've been shooting with the GFX, you'll know that that is also in the GFX, but unlike the GFX, this can actually be applied in continuous burst mode, whereas on the GFX it will only work in single shot mode because it's a very processor intensive effect, and because there's now 4 CPUs inside the X-T3, presumably that's why we can shoot at continuous burst and also have the color chrome effect applied. It's pretty neat. And we have the white balance, which is unchanged from the X-T2 as far as I can tell. We have auto, we have the custom settings, we have the Kelvin setting, and we have daylight and sunshine, and we have the little underwater icon, the goldfish bowl, and incandescent, and all of that other good stuff that is in the camera. And we also have dynamic range. This again is not changed, 100%, 200%, 400%, and auto. New to the X-T3, I think it was in the X-H1, is the dynamic range priority, which reduces the loss of detail in highlights and shadows for natural looking results when photographing high contrast scenes. You have options for auto, strong, weak, or off, and depending on the setting you choose, depends on which sensitivities it's available at. So for example, weak is available at sensitivities of 400 to 12,800, strong at sensitivities from 800 to 12,800, etc. We also have the usual highlight tone, which goes up from +4 to -2, so you can control your highlights. Shadows, same thing, +4 to -2. We also have color for strength of the color, obviously only applicable when you're shooting in a color film simulation, and sharpness and noise reduction and long exposure noise reduction, which are pretty much the same as in the X-T2. And we also have lens module optimizer, which again is in the X-T2. The lens module optimizer will apply built-in lens corrections for any of the lenses that you're using. We have color space sRGB and Adobe RGB. We have pixel mapping. If you have any hot pixels that you need to fix, you can do that yourself. And we of course have the select custom settings, where you can create your own set of custom settings. And if you watch one of my previous videos, I explain exactly how I set up my custom settings in the camera themselves. You have 7, you can name them yourselves, and you can use them really quite creatively. And I have my film's custom settings based on other photographers' styles of shooting, or editing I should say, and so I try and build those custom settings for that. So check out that video if you wish. And we have focus area, of course, where you can go and set the focus point and the size of the focus point that you wish to use in the camera when you're shooting. That can go down to very small and relatively large. You have much more control there over where the camera is going to focus, and if you move the focus point around, of course, then you can do that. It's the same as with the joystick. It moves from side to side. If you go off to the left, it will appear on the right hand side. We have AF mode, single point, zone, wide, tracking, and all. They are also the same as the X-T2. All, of course, means that you can use the rear command dial to basically toggle between single, wide, and zone. And we also have the AFC custom settings. So when you're in continuous focus, you have some presets to ignore obstacles, all of that kind of stuff. And you also have the custom settings, so you can adjust the tracking sensitivity and the speed sensitivity. We have the AF mode orientation, where you choose whether the focus mode and focus area used when the camera is in portrait orientation are stored separately from those that are used when the camera is in landscape orientation. AF point display, which will allow you to choose whether individual focus frames are displayed when zone or wide tracking is selected in the AF mode. And we have the number of focus points, which has increased a bit from the X-T2, which had 91 points and 325 points. And now on the X-T3, we have 117 and 425. This setting allows you to choose the number of focus points available for focus point selection in manual focus mode, or when single point is selected for AF mode. And it's worth pointing out at this point, I think, that the phase detection pixels, not to be confused with face detection, the phase detection, PHASE detection pixels, are across 100% of the sensor this time. And I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that's the first APS-C mirrorless camera that has 100% phase detection pixels right across the sensor. And we have pre-AF, of course, which will allow the camera to pre-focus. I don't recommend you have that on. The AF illuminator, which will help you to focus in low light should you wish to use that. And moving on to the face and eye detection, we have all of the usual subjects and options in here: face on, eye off, priorities for left, right eye, etc. And I've tested this a little bit so far, and I think I've been told that the face detection is at least twice as good as it was in the X-T2. I've tried it, and I would say even better than that. It seems brilliant, whereas before it was okay. And the face detection is something that I never really use that much, but I think definitely with the X-T3 it's a viable option for me. And we have AF and MF, which allows you to set whether you want manual focus to be overridden with AF or the other way around. And we have MF assist. We have the standard digital split image, standard focus peak highlighting, but you'll also see digital microprism there, which is a little bit like the old Fresnel interface that you would be used to if you shoot with manual SLRs. And we have focus check, where when this is set to on, the display will automatically zoom in on the selected focus area when the focus ring is rotated. Interlock, spot, AE and focus area. If you set this on to meter the current focus frame when single point for AF mode is set and spot is selected for photometry or metering as we probably know it. Then we have instant AF setting. Choose whether the camera focuses using single AF, AFS, or continuous AF, AFC, when the button to which the focus lock is assigned is pressed in manual focus mode. Really useful for back button focusing. And the depth of field scale, choose from film format basis to pixel basis, essentially whichever one you prefer. And we have the release and focus priority. And I always set, on all my cameras, I set AFS to focus and AFC to release. And that essentially means in release mode that the shutter response is prioritized over the focus, which I find that when I'm shooting in continuous focus gives me a far more accurate, far more correct set of images that are in focus when doing continuous shooting. And for the first time in the X-T range, we have a full touchscreen, which is pretty neat. You have options here for shot, AF, area, and of course you can switch it off. Essentially the differences are shot allows you to just tap the screen, it's going to shoot. AF option will allow you to do the same thing and shoot, but in continuous mode it will try and continually adjust the focus for it. And area means that it's going to select a point for focus or zoom. The focus frame will then just move to the selected point. So really neat, really useful for video shooting, really useful if you want to pull the tilt screen out and you're shooting maybe a wedding or something and you don't want to look like you're pressing the shutter button on the top of the camera. You can activate the exposure from the touchscreen on the back. Really, really useful feature to have in the X-T range. Okay, and moving on to the shooting setting, we have the normal drive settings with bracket, exposure bracketing, ISO bracketing, all of that good stuff. Film simulation bracketing, it's still at 3 options there. You can choose different film simulations and have 3 JPEGs written to the camera at the same time. We have the white balance bracketing and focus bracketing, of course, which is the focus stacking, effectively, if you want to do really detailed images of, say, macros or something like that. So when we go into the high-speed burst options, you can see now there are multiple different options. This camera is very, very, very fast. I shot this morning a series of my dog. The buffer goes up to 200 frames in the buffer before it starts slowing down using kind of standard JPEGs, and it's incredible. The 1.25 crop works out to be about 16 megapixels. It's going to give you blackout free shooting at 30 frames per second. There you go, you can see it right in front of you. It really, really is a huge improvement over the X-T2 in terms of focus speed, focus acquisition, and speed of shooting. Those of you that like to shoot fast sports photographers, or those of you who are street photographers or wedding photographers who like to do rapid fire shooting, then this camera really answers those questions. The X-T2 was very good, and I've been shooting with that for 2 years without any problems, but this really does step it up to another level. It's really quite incredible to see. Genuinely, it's just amazing. It's it's like a machine gun. That's all I could explain it. It just shoots, it doesn't stop. You also have CL low. None of these are being set with the vertical grip. You can do this all in the camera. And of course you have things like the advanced filters, toy cameras, low key, all of that stuff. Some of these can be fun, JPEG only of course, in the advanced filters. You can set the sports finder mode on or off, and this is, again, it activates that 1.25 crop, and you can see the frame there. So anything outside of that middle square, or the kind of wider square there, won't be captured. You'll see it in the viewfinder. It's a little bit like the optical viewfinder on the X Pro 2, I suppose. It's going to shoot really quick with zero blackout. Like I said, it works out to be about 16 million megapixels, 16 megapixels I should say, and it's just a beast. It's just a beast. It just shoots and shoots and shoots. It's incredible. Another new feature is the pre-shot electronic shutter high-speed burst. You can switch that on or off here, and that essentially means that the camera is going to start shooting frames as you're half depressed and as you're preparing to shoot it. I haven't really tested this yet. I've done a couple of shots with it and it works really well. Effectively, I can see this being used for people who like to shoot through the moment, and an example would be maybe if a bride is about to be hugged by somebody and you just want one shot out of that, but the camera is going to start shooting a little bit before and a little bit after, and it's going to give you that perfect shot in the middle. Really neat new feature on the X-T3. And of course we have the self timer and the intervalometer as usual. Okay, let's talk about the shutter type options. As you will remember, if you use an X-T2, you have mechanical, electronic, and you can have the option to let the camera choose between the two of them. Now in the X-T3, we have a whole load more options. We have the mechanical shutter, which obviously just uses the mechanical shutter, electronic, which uses the electronic shutter. For those of you that don't know the difference, a mechanical shutter will shoot up to 1/8000th of a second, the electronic shutter 1/32,000th of a second. So now we also have E front curtain shutter, which essentially reduces the lag between the shutter button being pressed and the start of the exposure. We have mechanical plus electronic, which allows the camera to choose between the two. We also have EFM E front plus mechanical, which is where the camera chooses the mechanical or electronic front curtain shutter according to the conditions. And we also have the E front plus mechanical plus electronic, which essentially allows the camera to choose the mechanical, electronic, or electronic front curtain shutter according to the conditions. Now, these are all have very different variables involved, including things like the shutter speed. You may see a little bit of distortion in the electronic shutter stuff because of the movement in the scene. However, all of that is much quicker, and I think I'm not sure what they call it now, but the frame reveal is now at 60, so you're going to see a lot less distortion, or you should see a lot less distortion, I should say. Which one of these you use is entirely up to you. I typically use the mechanical plus electronic on the X-T2, so I'm yet to investigate which will be the best option for me on the X-T3, but we have much greater variables now in the shutter types, which is great. And we have flicker reduction, which when you switch it on will reduce flicker in pictures displayed when shooting under fluorescent lights. Useful for kind of sports photographers when you're shooting indoors in stadiums, and also us wedding photographers when we have that those horrible fluorescent flickering lights. That actually works really well, and that was introduced to the X-T2 in the firmware 4.1. We have the ISO auto settings, and not much has changed here apart from you'll see that the default sensitivity goes all the way down to 160, which is the new low-level native ISO, so a tiny little bit better than the 200 that was in it previously. The rest of the stuff is the same. You can set your minimum shutter speed, you can set your default and your maximum ISOs. Main adapter setting, if you're using manual format legacy lenses, you can tell the camera what the focal length is inside the camera. And onto the flash stuff, where there's all kinds of different things going on here. I typically don't use flash, but you obviously have manual flash. You can sync, you can set your TTL modes. All of that good stuff is in the flash menu. You have your TTL lock mode, use last flash or use metered, LED light settings, master settings, CH settings if you're using flash that supports high-speed burst. All of that stuff is in there. Okay, onto the movie setting. Where to begin? You'll see now that there are 5 pages of movie settings in the X-T3, and this really is a huge update to the camera for those of you that are going to be using it to shoot movies. You have pretty much everything you need in this camera now, I think, with the exception of IBIS, which is still only available in the XH1. Everything that I think you are going to see in these menu systems will almost all of it is pretty new compared to the X-T2, and it's very promising as a film camera, the X-T3, I think. So the movie modes are vastly improved. You can see you've got 4K 60 frames per second. You can choose 200 megabits per second or 100. For that ratio, you have DCI, you have full HD, a 16:9 ratio, 17:9 ratios. At the lower shutter speeds, such as 24 and 25 frames per second, you can go up to 400 megabits per second. If you are that such way inclined, you can see here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see here how many different options are now available. The camera will shoot at 60 frames per second in 4K, which is amazing. It's going to give you some real opportunity to do some nice slow-mo stuff. I've been waiting for this in the video footage in the X-T3 since the X-T2 was capable of making films and the X-H1 came along. The X-H1 probably was the better film camera. No, I'm not so sure. Like I said, unless you need the IBIS, that's your kind of staple. I don't have an X-H1. I never bought an X-H1. The X-T3 really does seem to be the camera that's going to fulfill all of my filming needs. So you have a couple of codecs to choose from, H.264, you also have H.265, high efficiency video codec, which is going to allow you to shoot at 10-bit, which is pretty amazing. So we also have movie compression in the camera. We've got all intra and long GOP. Those of you that know anything about video making will understand those things. Essentially, it's about the frames and the grouping of the frames. And essentially, if you use long GOP, where it's going to, GOP stands for group of pictures, it's going to bring them closer together. So you can essentially use a smaller bit rate than the all intra codec without too much, if any, degradation in quality, I understand. And we have the super slow-mo stuff as well, full HD high-speed recording. You have options in there to shoot at 120 frames per second, double speed, 4x speed, 5 speed, etc. Those were introduced in the X-T2 in the firmware 4 update also, I believe. And of course, you can independently now set things like the film simulation, including the black and white adjustment, white balance, dynamic range, shadows, highlights. All of that stuff is independently set for filming and will be saved in the filming menu, in the video menu. So you don't have to worry about having your stills shooting at one different film simulation. Perhaps you want to set your stills to be shooting at with Velvia and your filming to be shooting with the Turner. So you can control all of that independently now. Also have the option for interframe noise reduction, where the camera is going to process the frames where there's no motion. Essentially, it's going to deal with that. Should allow for kind of smoother and less noisy images, filming, I should say, when you're kind of forced to shoot at higher ISOs. And we have F-Log, of course, to record F-Log. You can record that internally or externally. Peripheral light illumination. You have the focus area, so you can set the focus area for the video independently as well. All of that good stuff there. You have the movie AV mode, where it's going to choose multi or area. You have custom settings for the AFC in movie mode now, so you can choose for the tracking sensitivity on the subject. This is really cool because you may not always want this to be the same as you have for your stills photography. You also have it for the AF speed. You can obviously go between slow and fast depending on what you're filming. You now also have face and eye detection in movie mode on the X-T3. This is a massive thing, I think, because when you're filming, if you're doing interviews, etc., you want to be able to track that accordingly. You have your standard focus assist. You also have the focus check. You have the 4K movie out to HDMI, so you could send it to an external device. You have all of those options that are still the same. You have full HD movie to the SD card or HDMI. You have the HDMI output info display, 4K HDMI standby quality. All of this stuff was in the firmware 2 for the X-T2 also. HDMI recording control, which I'm using now. Now we have zebras. We also have zebras, which will allow us to see the highlights. And you can choose to go left or right, and you actually have a zebra level as well, so you can have the strength of that. I actually found when I was doing some test filming that 50% was a bit too much for me, so I tend to bring that down a little bit. I think zebras is something that people have been waiting for a long time. You have internal and external mic level adjustments. On the X-T3, this is a big thing also. You can set it to be automatic, manual. You can control the dB ratings. You have the limiters, you have the wind filters, low pass filters or low cut filter, and also headphone volume. Now remember, both the headphone and the microphone input jack are in the body, 3.5mm in the body. You can set the time codecs. You can use that if you so wish to be running the manually or current time, or set them HDMI time input also, or output I should say, for that. And you also now have the ability to start the tally light, so you can choose where you're going to have that running, where you're going to display that on the screen, or wherever you want it. You've got a lot of control over that. You have movie silent control, so that's going to disable all of the sounds in the camera, if you like, when you're recording. So all of that's great. From a filming point of view, I think it's amazing. It really, really is amazing, and I just can't wait to get going with that. So if we move down to the user settings, unfortunately we still don't have seconds in the time. I find that quite disappointing. I really wanted to see seconds in the date time options. We can just hope that will come eventually at some point, fingers crossed. We'll get there, I'm sure. Time difference, the usual stuff. You've seen all of this before in any of your cameras, whether they're Fujifilm or not. You've got the My Menu option, obviously, where you can add menu items to your own personal menu. You can see on the bottom left-hand side on the screen at the minute you have the My option. So I'm just adding sharpness to that, and that allows me to get to that menu option. Anything I kind of use regularly, I can add items and remove them and reorder them, etc. I typically don't use that very much, to be honest with you. Sensor cleaning, now you can have it to automatically happen when you switch it on or off. Obviously you can reset the entire camera, menu reset or setup reset, the whole thing. You have the sound settings, AF beep, self-timer beep, operation volume, all of the stuff that's in there that you've been used to. If you've been using any of the Fujifilm cameras, you'll understand all of that stuff. Pretty straightforward. Playback volume there also, that's for your headphone volume. Now you can choose EVF brightness, so you can actually, and also for the LCD, you can adjust the color now as well, which means that you can fine tune, you can almost, it's like calibrating the screen, I suppose, the EVF and the LCD. I never really done this before, and so I'll test it to see kind of what options work best, but my gut feeling is probably the defaults will be the best for this. Image display, so image review, same as before. Auto rotate image on display, whether you want it to change in the viewfinder when you see it. You have the preview exposure white balance still. All of this stuff is the same. We have natural live view option, which I think is essentially the same as what used to be preview picked effect. So it gives you kind of a more natural view of the image when a film simulation is selected. I think, I'm not really sure 100% about the natural live view just yet, but I think that's what it is. And all of the usual other stuff, you can set it for T numbers, F numbers if you're using cine lenses. The dual display settings are still there, same as the X-T2. Display custom settings, this is where you can choose what's displayed on your EVF, LCD. So, you can choose what's on and what's off. You have large indicator modes for on and off also. This is really useful, EVF and LCD. You can also change, it essentially makes the images or the icons larger, so as you can see them now on the screen, you can make them larger, which is pretty cool. You can also, if we go back down to that, you can, in the display custom settings, you can actually change the position on the screen in the film when you're filming. So if you watch this now, I'll switch it back in. So here we can choose exactly where we want certain things on the screen. We can move them around, a little bit like custom setting, a little bit like the function buttons, I guess. You can choose what you show and where you show it, you can move them around. Pretty useful actually, especially if you're used to cameras that have the icons in different places and you just want to replicate that. Now this is pretty neat as well, information contrast adjustment, so you can change the brightness if you're shooting outside, and look at that, the red. So if you're shooting in the dark, or if you're shooting in an environment where you need as little light as possible but you still want to see the screen, that's going to be really useful. Amazing little option that is, I think. The button dial settings, again, all of this is the same. Hold down the joystick to lock it all out. You can configure your Q menu. I never use the Q menu, but you can configure it if you want. Your function buttons, you have a whole load of function buttons as usual. But in the function buttons now, you'll see that along with the ones on the kind of rings and everything, you also have the touchscreen. So you can use the touchscreen swipes, the gestures to do different things. You can move the AFL around. The rear command dial can be used for various different things as well. That's really neat. I think the touchscreen, to be able to control on the touchscreen, what you want to use, effectively have it as a function button. I think it's pretty neat. We'll come out of that, and I will talk briefly about the... you can set the command dials, the front and rear command dials, to be multiple different things. Some people turn them off, some people use them for exposure compensation, some people use them for ISO. You've got multiple controls over those, which is great. Typically, I'll just leave those as the defaults. Also, you'll see that the ISO, expanded ISO, is the same for the elevated level, but the lower level is now at 80. So we have 80 as the lower expanded ISO. You have your shutter AF options and your shutter AE options. It's the same as previously, nothing new there. Shoot without lens, whether you want the camera to work without a lens attached, shoot without card, that should be off. Focus ring, the direction of the focus ring that you want it to go, clockwise, counterclockwise. Focus ring operation, now we have non-linear or linear. And I think this is to do with the lenses you have attached, whether they have the different kind of connections, mounts, etc. So you have controls. I don't really know that explicitly yet, so we'll see how that pans out, but I think that's what that's about. We have the AE/AF lock mode, press in and switch as usual. And we now have AWB lock mode, which I'm presuming is locking the auto white balance when pressing or switching, which is neat if that is true. Need to test that, see what that does. You have the aperture ring settings, touchscreen configuration, switch it on, off. Now you can also control where the touchscreen is active. So here, if you just want maybe the left-hand side of the, I don't know, if you keep hitting it with your nose or whatever, you can actually choose to have it right and left. You can lock the settings completely. It's pretty customizable, the touchscreen stuff. In fact, it's very customizable. You have complete control over it. It's very good. Power management, obviously boost. You do not need the grip for the boost to be working. You have normal boost and power management off. Save data settings, usual stuff. You have, you can edit the file names for different file types, sRGB, Adobe RGB, all of that good stuff is in there. You can decide whether to send the images as backup or RAW plus JPEG or sequential. All of that stuff in here. You now have the folder selection creations, so you can create multiple folders on your memory card and choose which folders you want those images to go to. That's pretty neat. Also, you can set the, as previously, set your author and copyright data into the EXIF. That's burnt into the EXIF of the image straight away by the camera. Now you have Bluetooth settings, of course. It shows you a nice little QR code, so you can just point your camera at that and it will activate it properly for you. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi obviously built in as standard now in all of the phones, in all of the cameras. You can set it so it'll actually automatically connect and start sending the images across if you so wish. You have your different location and time settings for the information that is going to sync across with the smartphone. Very cool. Standard stuff in here, your IP address settings, PC autosave when you're using that implementation, Instax if you're registering it with an Instax printer, PC connection mode, you have the tethering options here. You also have the RAW conversion backup if you're going to be using the XRAW software to back up your settings. You have your general stuff here, geotagging if you're using geotagging, memory cards, all of that good stuff is going on in these menu options here. And that, my friends, is it. That is the complete overview of the new Fujifilm X-T3 menu. Obviously, it's not a review. I will be doing that as soon as I can. Hopefully, it's been useful. Hopefully, those of you that are pre-ordering the camera will find it useful. Those of you that are just interested in what the camera can do or the differences between the X-T2, X-T1, X Pro 2, XH1, all of that stuff. I appreciate it was a little bit long and I covered everything that I possibly could. And there are still some things, even though I have the camera, we don't have a manual or anything yet, so there are certain things that I'm still a little bit fuzzy about. But I think I covered everything that needs to be covered. I hope you found it useful. Please do subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell icon, that really helps me out. And come back in a few days and there will be more good stuff on the channel, I hope. Have a great day, enjoy yourselves, and really look forward to getting that X-T3 in your hands because it is genuinely an epic camera.